In a world where there is so much turmoil, arguments, church splits, finger pointing, always needing to be right, this interview today with my guest, Deidra Riggs, who's the author of One, Unity in a Divided World, comes at the perfect time. Because we discussed today that it's not about being right, but it's about being in relationship with people, in building the church, in being open and inclusive for one another, and essentially walking the way of Jesus. We're tired of the arguments and building walls. It's time now to be bridge builders and friends with everyone, being in a world of multiculturalism and inviting them to be our friends. Well, Deidra Riggs, so great to have you all the way from Lincoln, Nebraska via Skype. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, I know that you're passionate about oneness and unity and reconciliation, and those are timely words really for this time. I mean, for all time, but I think in the news and things that we're experiencing today, so timely that we have your voice, in society and culture to speak on this and to actually write a book about it too. But before we get to that, I know that there is a story, your story, that's behind this, that has fueled this passion from your experiences. So let's hear that. I know my viewers and listeners love to know new people. And
Right.
So I'd love to hear your story from your beginning, your faith journey, and how this reconciliation and unity has come about in your own life.
Okay. Yeah, I'm happy to tell that story.
Mm-hmm.
When it starts when I was 2 years old, so way
Wow.
back when.
Yeah.
It was me, my dad, my mom. I'm the oldest child, and our family moved to New Jersey. And it was really important to my parents to be able to find a church for us to go to. So they looked in the yellow pages,
Wow.
which is an ancient text,
Mm-hmm.
and they found a little Baptist church that they wanted to try one Sunday morning. So, and of course, this story is told to me. It's been handed down to me over time.
Mm-hmm.
But we showed up at that church, and it was one of those churches where you walk in the back door, and then you're in the narthex, and then there's a double door that opens to the sanctuary. So, but you couldn't see into the sanctuary. So my parents walked in, and this was like 1967-ish.
Mm-hmm.
So now everyone's doing math to figure out how old I am. And so we walked into that.
Yeah.
They opened up the doors to that sanctuary, and they looked in, and they realized that there were no other people who were brown in the congregation, that it was a white church. And this was in the 60s, and my parents looked at one another and said, I'm not quite sure we want to do this every Sunday morning. I don't know that we want to be these kind of revolutionaries every Sunday morning. But I was 2, and I had walked halfway down the aisle of the sanctuary.
Wow.
So someone had to go get me. And so they, you can't just go in, get your child and run out, especially because, people would be like, was there just like a black family that was here and then they left? So my parents ran in, got me, and then they sat down in the pew and stayed. And,
Wow.
they say the service, it was okay, but that afternoon, the pastor came to our home, and that really impacted my dad. And he decided we would go back to that church the following week. And then we stayed at that church. And so I grew up as one member of the only brown family in a white congregation. And,
Wow.
I think in that moment that I walked down that aisle, that was a seed being planted in my spirit by God. Because as a 2-year-old, and as you're growing up, you only see what you see. You don't have any filters. No one has told you what is good or bad, or, you're just experiencing the world as it unfolds to you. And I started to notice as I grew up in that church that the people in my school looked different from the people in my church. And when I would visit my grandparents in Virginia, I would go to church with them, and the people in their church all looked like me. And so it was very confusing to me because I was being taught about this Jesus who loves and accepts everyone and died for everyone. But I couldn't figure out why we were divided in our churches. And I would, as I got older, and I wasn't able to articulate it then as I am now, but as I got older, I started to wonder, of all the organizations in the world and the institutions in the world, I would think that the church would be the one that could figure out how to worship across racial lines.
Yeah.
Um, and it wasn't happening as I could
Mm.
see it just with my, toddler, adolescent eyes. And so that started me on this journey. And my driving question throughout life has been that why can't the church figure out how to worship across racial lines? And
Hmm.
it's a very basic question. And I would ask people, and they didn't really have answers. This is the way it's always been. This is, or wow, I never noticed that before. I never thought about that before.
Hmm.
And so it's just always been, I don't know, at the foundation of my faith, really,
Yeah.
my faith journey and my faith experience. And as a woman of color in the church, my experience in the world and then in the church has just informed my faith and kind of shaped it. And I got older and realized that because of that, my experience of faith and church is very different from people who may not have had that same experience. So I really, really was interested in doing multicultural church. And as it turned out, not anything I had planned, and certainly not anything I would have wished. I married a man who is a pastor. And I was, all I really wanted was a man who would go to church on Sunday. But
Well, you got it.
and he had, his own experience and own history. And we both, after we got married and had children, we realized we really had this passion for multicultural ministry. And for me, when I was thinking about multicultural ministry, I was just thinking about Black people and white
Hmm.
people in America, in the United States.
Hmm.
And with our whole history in the United States of that particular division, I just, that was the natural
Yeah.
response for me. And over time, God strangely called us to Lincoln, Nebraska. And I can remember when my husband was telling me he was thinking about coming to pastor this church here in Lincoln. I said to him, I didn't know anything about Nebraska. I didn't even know where it was on the map. And I said to him, so are there people in Nebraska? And he said, yes. And I said, well, are there Black people in Nebraska? Well, there will be when we get there. And so it was the strangest place to come to try to do in my mind. I was like, are you sure this is where you want us to be? But it turns out that Lincoln, Nebraska is has one of the largest refugee resettlement populations.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And there's a university here in town, in Lincoln. And so large population of international students who are here. The largest Sudanese refugee population is in Omaha, Nebraska, which is just an hour north of
Wow.
us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so God was saying to me, look, you're thinking about multiculturalism as Black and white, but I have created a diversity of people.
Mm-hmm.
And so we came to pastor this church that at the time was a white church. And they said, it's a downtown church. And they said they wanted to do this work of becoming more multicultural and serving the community that was there. But the reality of that for everyone, for us, my husband, for the congregation, is we didn't know what we were doing. We just didn't know. And so I always say we experienced swift and rapid attrition.
Wow.
Congregation. Yeah. And we were left with just this core group of, people who really didn't have an option, older people who, didn't have a way to get to church unless someone was bringing them. And we have a large transient population. And then the university students who were just there and really committed to going to this church. So it was a small congregation. And then we got a call from our local refugee resettlement agency, and they asked us if our church would sponsor a family who were and are refugees from Burma and had been living in a refugee camp in Thailand. And I did not at that point know there were Karen people. I didn't know there was a country called Burma. I didn't, none of that. And so this family came to us on the 4th of July. They landed in the airport at night, and there were fireworks, just in the air. And
Wow.
they arrived with just the clothes on their back. And it was a woman and her 4 boys.
Hmm.
And we drove them to their apartment. And that began this journey because the Karen population, many, many years ago, our denomination sent a missionary to them, and that's how they learned about Jesus. And they are very,
Wow.
very loyal to our denomination, and we didn't know that.
Hmm.
So this woman's name is Tokay, and she called her family and she said, "You need to come to America and come to this city, and you need to come to this church." And so we now have about 300 Karen
No,
people worship at our
really
church. Yes,
amazing. Wow.
it's really crazy. But that was a challenge to me because I had to face my biases. I
Hmm.
had to face my um, prejudgments that I had about people from refugee camps and people who don't speak English and people who don't have money and people who don't have means.
Hmm.
When the people who were coming to us had been doctors and lawyers and
Yeah.
professional people and educators, in their context, in their home. And so I had to deal with that. And the Lord was just showing me, you don't have all the answers to this diversity question.
Yeah.
And I would like to grow you in this area. And so he really drew me to that passage, that prayer that Jesus prayed for us in John 17:21, that we would all be one. And I had to really think about what that meant. And that journey for me has expanded beyond race and just this realization that we divide ourselves in so many different
Hmm.
ways. And we even divide ourselves, our souls,
Yeah.
divide our souls down the middle. And we are constantly, maybe not always, but constantly navigating this imaginary fault line that we have set up, and these imaginary walls that we
Hmm.
build. And the word tells us that Jesus came to tear down all the walls that we set up to
Yeah.
keep one another at a distance.
Deidre, that is you brought so many points up that I've even experienced when we're looking at urban city like a Toronto or even in suburban areas where I live. I
Yeah.
think there's a point I want to kind of bring up because I think one of the things that I've noticed is that there are churches that have multiculturalism, but I'm also finding more and more churches that are really segregated by ethnicity. And it's
Yes.
like we've got the Chinese church and the Filipino church
Mm-hmm.
and the black church, and
That's
people have
right.
actually started forming like that's that church. And
Mm-hmm.
I grieve about that because I don't believe that's what Jesus intended when he said what you just said, oneness. But
Yeah.
I think there is fear in all of us because that means I need to get to know them. I need to get past my biases. I need to be uncomfortable with the differences. And for a lot of us, Deidre, I think we don't want to go there because we want to be safe and comfortable, and it's easy to be in a community, right? We want sameness, but sameness means us.
Right. Yeah.
And that's the
Yeah.
struggle. I think that's the thing you've really hit on because I'm even saying for myself, it's work
Yes,
to
it is
be
work.
with other different kinds of people, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sometimes it's work just to be with my husband. So
Exactly. I was going to say that too, but I was saying.
and he would say that, I mean, I'm always telling him, honey, you need to put the fact that you're married to me on your resume because it is so work. So, um, yeah, so I mean, so many people are doing that work. And there's a flip side to this, which is, especially here in the United States where we have this history of slavery and we still haven't quite overcome all
Hmm.
of the repercussions of that and all of the way that has diseased us in our country. So, specifically, I can speak to that African American experience and the Black church experience.
Hmm.
In, I can remember at one point my dad said, and he was in corporate America. He was there. He tells the story about how his sales team had to go court another company, and they were having dinner at the golf club, and my dad couldn't go to the golf club, and so he was left out of that. And so I remember him saying, I deal with this all week long. On Sunday, I want to go be with my people. I want to be able to relax and be myself. I want to be able to speak my native tongue, which is, English, but it's just a different way of speaking. And so I get that. I get that there are, and even, our Karen population, while these people are, they have degrees in medicine, but can't get a job in medicine here. And so they work in the meat packing industry. And on Sunday is the day they can come together and be leaders, and they can teach one another, and they can celebrate their culture. And there's generational stuff with that, which that's a whole nother conversation. But I totally understand some of that need or some of the perceived need for division. And it's just comfortable to be with your people, even if it's just one day a week. But that work of claiming what Jesus asked for us, it seems harder than it is. And it's like going to the gym. The idea of going to the gym, the result will be good. Getting up off the couch and actually going is really hard. And I say to myself all the time, I'm going to the gym for 10 minutes, and it always turns into an hour. But it's just convincing myself that I'm going to do this little bit, and that's all I'm holding myself to. And I think it's the same with us, especially in the church, is we don't have to solve the whole problem, but we do need to examine our blind spots. We need to examine the things that we've accepted as normal and okay, and ask ourselves, why have we accepted this? What is the witness that we're giving to the world? Because the world is watching us. And if we can figure this out, if we can figure out how to come together across all of our divisions, that's something that that's what Jesus prayed. He said, the reason I'm praying that they will all be one is so that the world will know that you sent me. And that is how the world will know that Jesus was sent by God, because God loved us so much and loves us so much. And it's unconditional love, and it's available to anyone. But when the world looks at the church and sees all these artificial walls and invisible fault lines that we navigate around and, add litmus tests to the gospel for people, and they say they're not doing anything different than the rest of the world. Why do I want to be like that? But if we could begin to be bridge builders, I think we'd have a different impact on the world.
Deidra, that's a really good point, because I think for most people we want that, but it seems like our default is to build walls. Like I feel like in some of the church experiences, church splits, things that we've divided ourselves on as far as issues and politics, it has made the church the church was supposed to be this safe place of care and acceptance. And I hear from people that are not Christian, they're like, but it's not. It seems like you're having more warring within. You're so divided on so many issues that you're missing the point of what it's supposed to be. And these are people that are not, quote unquote, followers of Jesus yet, right? Friends that are saying this. And so, as someone, for me, this Gen Xer who has been always like, I want to work at breaking those dividing walls. I'm trying hard to be open and yet fighting against this image of church that people are looking at. And I'm like, but that's not us. That's not me and my husband. And we're trying to fight against this. And then I get angry at the church because I'm like, why are you causing me so many issues? I'm trying to build bridges to people, and they come at me. So it does take work. My husband and I, we're really trying hard to be with people that are not churched, be with different ethnicities, be with people that are, of different, sexual orientation, even just to love people in the way that I believe Jesus has called us to love. And it's hard.
It's hard. Jesus left us with just two things to do: love God and love people.
Right.
And he knew. Now, I'm sure he was like, I'm just giving you two things to do. They're going to be really hard for you. It's so difficult. And it's this constant surrendering of my own agenda, my desire to be comfortable, my need to be safe, my
Yes.
need to be right, all of that. I have to let that go. And as soon as I am able to successfully let go one thing, I am shown, well, here's another thing that you need to let go. And really, I mean, Jesus said, I have come that you might have life. And I always thought he said, I have come that you might be right. And that's that's not what he
That's
said.
right.
He's not interested in whether or not we win the argument. He absolutely is not. He's not interested in whether we choose the right side of whatever is the current conversation of the day. He's interested in how well do we love even our enemies. There is no exclusion. There is no one we are not commanded to love. And love is not like this mushy kind of romantic say anything love. That is love, but this is not the love we're being called to. We are being called to sacrificial love, where I honestly and truly am willing to lay down my life even for my enemy. That is hard stuff. So it's just this surrender. It's God is calling us constantly to surrender, surrender, surrender. And that is scary for people, especially people, like us who are middle class people who are comfortable, and we have air conditioning and we have food in our refrigerator and healthcare and all of that. It's really hard to surrender, to think that we might have to surrender any of that.
That is so good, because I think especially in North America, it is about comfort, right? And it's easier to agree than actually go with a deep conviction. Like, I've had friends who say, Mel, it's hard because it'd be so easy to agree, but deep down I know that that's wrong, that actually it's the opposite. But it's so easy to do that because then, I'm so busy and I have all these issues in my life already, but when it comes to this, I just want to agree and pat it down and say it's okay, and we're in our church. And I said, but that's not the way of Christ. Like, Jesus' life was not an easy way. He could have easily, to make things easy, agreed with the Pharisees and gone the way that way. And then he wouldn't have had all this conflict and eventually been crucified. But, I look at Jesus over and over, and it's like, that isn't the way. And I think you're right, Deidra. And that's hard because then you're confronted with yourself about surrender. And are you really following Jesus? And then you're like, I don't want that back on me. It was so easy to kind of keep it out there.
Exactly. And I think that's the whole point. I need to be right, because as long as I'm right, then that means I'm better than someone else, right? And so there's this, it's really important. I may not be better. I may not agree with everyone up here, but at least I'm right and I'm better than the people over here. And so I've always got someone I've one-upped. And you said it perfectly, that we are confronted with ourselves. And that's what Jesus is after. The Holy Spirit of God is after this, me. He has not dispatched me into the world to correct everyone else. He is interested in an intimate relationship with me and transforming my heart and my spirit to be more like Christ. Who, when I read that story of, the story of the woman caught in adultery, and they bring her before Jesus.
One of my favorites.
And the word says he writes in the sand. And what that did for Jesus to write in the sand, it meant that he got low before her and put his head down to look at the sand in front of this woman who had been caught in the act of adultery. Instead of casting her to the ground, standing over her, pointing his finger at her and telling her how she had been wrong, he humbled himself before her. And that's what we're called to do, is to humble ourselves before people, to let the Holy Spirit work in us to transform us so that we can love our enemies.
It's beautiful. Deidra, you know what? I'm so glad that all this passion that we're talking about is put into this book here that you've just done, One, Unity in a Divided World. It is packed full of, even it's just a portion of what we've been talking about, but just so much about finding oneness and unity. And it's filled with stories of your own life and interactions you've had with people. And the importance of culture making. I mean, this is a profound book that I know is timely. What's your hope with this? Because I mean, already I know what we've been talking about is the heart of the book. What's your hope when people get this book, when they finish it? What are you hoping that they come out of it with?
Yeah, one of my big hopes was just to write it.
Yes, I get that.
There, and I hope people can read it not as either a judgment or a prescription, but simply as an invitation to a conversation and to an opening of our hearts to let God show us his way of oneness, not the way that we've described it, not the way that we think it ought to go down, but what God really intends for us when God talks about oneness. And what was Jesus really praying for us when he prayed for oneness for us? What is that Father, Son, Holy Spirit oneness? And how do we aspire to that through the power of the Holy Spirit? So, yeah.
That's profound. Deidra, we need more of your voices. We need more of you out there, because I think that's a really important thing that I'm doing, a takeaway, is that it's not about being right? It's about love and building relationship. And so what if I'm wrong? Like, I think we have to get past it. Like, maybe I am wrong. And that's okay.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't know. And that's okay too, right? I mean, we have to get past this culture of that I am right and I will prove it. And so that means that I will control and I will put you down so that I am right. And at the end of the day, I've had those experiences, and you come away, do you really come away fulfilled and feeling fantastic after that? No. You actually feel the opposite, right?
Yeah, I feel like the more right I am, and not that, there is absolute truth. There's all of that. But the more right I am, the less opportunity there is for me to grow, because I figured it out, right? So there's no need for me to have any more conversations about this or read anything else about it or listen to any podcasts about it, because I have figured it out. And so, and I am, 53 today. I don't know who I'm going to be when I'm 63. And I don't know, my 43-year-old didn't know I would be this person now. So, God is always, my grandmother would say, once you have it all figured out, you may as well buy your coffin, because what else is there to learn? There's nothing else to learn. So yeah, it's this investment in being right is something to hold loosely and to be willing to sacrifice before God.
Beautiful. Well, Deidra Riggs, what a pleasure to talk with you. I could talk to you for another 2 hours. And, to the viewers and listeners, get this book. One, Unity in a Divided World, Deidra Riggs. I believe you can pick it up on Amazon, correct?
Yes.
And everywhere else, Christian bookstores as well. But thank you. Thank you for your voice. Thank you for what you bring to us. And thank you for being with me on the show today.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks for checking out this week's episode of Your Story with Melinda. There's plenty more at faithstrongtoday.com/yourstory. But if you really want more, make sure you subscribe to the show so you never, ever miss an episode.